Welcome to the Dream Machine. My name is Aaron.
And my name is Patricia.
Hey, Patricia. Up for a wild one today?
Yes, indeed. Especially since we're going to be jumping into 2019, I take it that we need to have something wild to shake us up a bit.
Yeah, and by the way, Happy New Year to all our listeners over at Dream Machine, and hope that 2019 is going to be as prosperous as I hope it's going to be. So
yeah, can you believe that this is going to be the last year of the 2010s decade?
Yeah, it is, and also it's going to be. And tell you what, actually, I think maybe to go into DreamWorks a little bit is actually going to be a pretty exciting year for them too. So
yeah, that's true because two movies are going to be coming out this year for DreamWorks. One of them that we're really excited about, How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty hopefully it's going to be a pretty well received addition to the How to Train Your Dragon series, because this is going to be the third movie, I think, in the.
It's going to be I believe it's also going to be the last one as well.
Yeah, and I think I actually kind of agree with that because I think we're hoping Toy Story 4 is not going to be a dumpster fire, but I tend to see that movies seem to start getting a lot worse after we've gone off the third sequel, I think, and so. I'm hoping it's going to be something that we're going to look. Hopefully, all the other movies we're going to look forward to, that the sequels are going to be hopefully as good as the originals. So
that's true.
Yeah. Anyway, going back to what we're talking about, we have a pretty good one for you today. So, shall we show everyone what it is?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, here we go. So, Madagascar is a 2005 computer-animated comedy film by DreamWorks Animation. The film tells the story of Central Park zoo animals that have spent their lives in blissful captivity and unexpectedly shipped back to Africa, getting shipwrecked on the island of Madagascar. And for those of you who do not know where Madagascar is, it is a island nation that is on the east coast of Africa. And yeah, that's right, isn't it? It's on the east coast. Yeah, it is on the east coast of Africa, on the near to the bottom of the. Underneath the Horn of Africa. So, I mean, regards to, there's a lot of ground we've got to cover here with Madagascar. It's nearly as big as the country itself. And so I think, shall we touch on some of the subjects that we know are going to come up as like lengthy discussion points? And we'll get those out of the way before we do that. So, as we all know, David Schwimmer is in this movie, and he plays the character, and I've already forgotten the names of the characters, which is not a good thing for me to do. His
name is Melman.
Melman, yeah, and so Ben Stiller plays Alex, and Chris Rock's playing Marty. But I think every time David Schwimmer seems to come into a discussion point, at least amongst my group of friends, not just on podcasts and things like that, there's always seems to be kind of like this, oh, what a shame of like a lackluster career of David Schwimmer, which I think is a bit unfair. I don't know how you feel about it.
I mean, to be fair, for a lot of people who grew up in the 90s, everybody's going to know David Schwimmer as Ross from Friends.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be like, that distinct, character when it comes to an actor. The same way about how people see, Adam West as Batman, or they're going to see, William Shatner as Captain Kirk. And I guess for David
Mark
Schwimmer...
Hamill as Luke Skywalker. So
exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a shame that David Schwimmer pretty much has that distinction of that. And remember that news report that we talked about in the Aaron Meta show about there was a thief that somebody was kind of looking like David Schwimmer and people thought it was him?
Yeah, it's like, and also on top of that as well, he did actually a parody video of that as well, and taking some beer, and my goodness, the uncanny valley is very small, I think, when you're looking at both of those images together. But in regards to David Schwimmer, I think we need to give him I want to actually kind of change the narrative a little bit, because after he did Friends, he actually appeared in ER. After that, and also he appeared in other things like LA Law, NYPD Blue, and actually that was before Friends, before saying that. And so
he was in Band of Brothers, which was a very, very well-known miniseries at the time, and
And he was on Mad TV. He was on Third Rock from the Sun, I believe, as well. I think so he did do other stuff besides Friends. And I do admit, I think in regards to he always will be known as Ross from Friends, because Friends is just like this just big phenomenon. And dare I say, I mean, I don't know. It's interesting because I think if The Simpsons continues to kind of like be massively oversaturated, I think some people will probably start remembering Friends a bit more fondly than I think they will of The Simpsons.
Well, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because I'm sure that you know about the recent news on Netflix that, Friends being renewed, a lot of shows had to be taken off from Netflix just so they can keep Friends into its lineup, because a lot of people, especially millennials who grew up in the 90s, are rediscovering Friends.
Yeah, and just I think it's, I think there's another appreciation, I think, for it as well, and I won't be too surprised if, I'll go to a Comic-Con convention and everyone's dressed up as, characters from Friends. At some point, so imagine can you actually do that?
Exactly, like maybe the Rachel hairstyle will kind of come back into relevancy or something.
I'll tell you what, actually, I do still see people with Rachel hairstyles.
No, no kidding.
No. So it still has a cultural influence, I think, to this day. But in regards to going back to David Schwimmer, and I know we can probably get all sorts of caught up into all sorts in regards to Friends, but he did also most of some notable work. He actually did. I don't know if you ever heard of this this mini-series that actually came out. So there was actually a dramatization of The People versus O.J. Simpson.
I heard about that. Yeah, I did actually hear about that.
He played a character in that, and from what I was told, he actually did it really well. So he's like it's and there's been those disasters where comedic actors tried to go into more serious roles. Like you remember Jim Carrey when he tried to do that horror movie, and obviously it didn't go well. And then also there was Robin Williams when he did 1 Hour Photo, which I think wasn't warmly received from what I gather. So there's been that problem of transition from going from one type of material over to the other type of material. But David Schwimmer I think did really good well with it, I thought. So I think I just want to get that out of the way really, because I know it's going to be a massive talking point. I think once we start talking about any film that things that have David Schwimmer in it.
Yeah. But to be fair, I think that out of the 4 characters, I think that his is probably the weakest, because everybody else just seems to overtake him.
Well, I don't know. I would argue that probably Gloria probably was one of.
I guess that's true. Maybe I would say with both of them as a tie. I think that Alex and Marty have the most personality, and especially in the first movie, Alex's struggle of not eating any of the animals is actually pretty interesting. Yeah. Especially since he was raised in the zoo, and he's been surrounded by a whole bunch of animals, and then his instincts start kicking in.
Yeah, I mean this is the thing though, that the problem is that should really be a story arc, and the problem is it ends up being kind of being the forefront of the movie. It comes between second and third act, and I think because if you keep in mind the whole story to begin with was Alex going into it wasn't. It was Marty. Sorry, wanting to actually go out and experience the wild, and because and again that story point isn't really well explained. I don't think.
Yeah, because not really. I mean, I would have really liked it if maybe Marty, maybe he saw something on TV of a documentary or a nature show, or maybe Marty was, maybe bored of the zoo and he wanted to go out and explore, or maybe he, maybe he feels restricted and he wants to experience the wild for the first time. There's really no explanation. It's pretty vague.
Yeah. Now stay with me, DreamWorks fans, because I know this is going to get a lot of flack by me saying this, but the Pixar storyline, telling theory that they go upon, which everyone else seems to be copying to this day. They say about here's this character, here's the situation they're in, and then hijinks ensue. After that, they're going to go into that way. It's easily just do this. You have Marty, who is in a zoo, and his enclosure is next to, let's say, those educational rooms, which they take classes of kids into, and they show them all sorts of stuff. Let's say, for example, they had a classroom, they had a kids on a date on a school trip. Going into that room, and it's right next to Marty's enclosure. So he pops his head over through the window and actually sees what it's like actually in Africa from what the all the naturalists tell all the school kids. So Marty overhears that, and that's how he learns about the wild. that because it's like, it's not this what you see in the zoo is not necessarily what goes on out in Africa, and he gets to be shown through the school children. Like what it's actually like out there, and that's what inspires him. Yeah,
there's a lot of rules in Pixar when it comes to like, what is good writing in movies, which I really highly recommend that you check out the io9.com's article discussing about the 22 rules of storytelling according to Pixar.
Yes.
It's pretty much like essential if you want to get into, writing anything, because it really just gets you into the basics on how to tell a good story.
Mind you, we're going to get all the South Park fans now saying, like, oh, what about Matt and Trey Parker and the way they tell stories? And it's like, I mean, I'm sure that's a debate for another time, I think, on Old School Lane. But I guess going back into the story of it, I guess, it's like, yeah, so going back to my original point, the story arc overtakes the story, which isn't really good, because it would be all right if if whole Alex's mental breakdown, I guess you could say, and like his instincts start kind of like kicking in, and all of a sudden he has to be this wild animal out in the wild. And I understand from that point that can be like, but the fact that it's kind of like it's then all of a sudden at the forefront, it just comes very, very suddenly. Like, it just overtakes the other story of of Marty realizing that I'm out here in the wild and this isn't what I was expecting. Maybe I'm probably better off in the zoo.
It's kind of funny that you even mentioned that, because now with Marty being so excited about experiencing the wild, and now they're thinking about, oh, it's not working out the way I hope it is, and they immediately think that at first, hey, why don't we just try to go back, but then they find out that they are pretty much stuck and they have to live with it.
Yeah. So it's and on top of that as well, so we're going to go into spoiler territory here, absolutely, but they never make it back home.
No, they don't.
No, they don't. They're pretty much just abandoned on the ship, and it's just this kind of like, so I think we better, before we get into that bit of it, but we have to address the penguins, I think.
Let's address the penguins.
So the penguins stick out like a sore thumb in this film, like how they, and I don't get how how they themselves understand what the wild is like.
Well, here's the thing. So I'm sure that a lot of people who are huge fans of DreamWorks probably know this, but for those who don't, the penguins were concepts that were taken from a canceled idea of penguins portraying themselves as a rock band called Rockumentary. And it was a movie that was supposed to be pitched around like the late 90s, like one of the earliest DreamWorks movies, but it was canceled. And so they liked the idea of the penguin, so they decided to stick it into here, but instead of it being a rock band, they're like this kind of like an undercover group of penguins who just sneak around and such. So,
oh my god, can you imagine if they went with the idea that, like, instead of calling it Spinal Tap, they would have called it like Snowy Tap or something like that? It's like,
jeez. No. But yeah, I do admit that at first they do kind of you don't know what they're thinking of per se. Like they just seem to like sneak around, and they say, like, you didn't see anything, and they just seem like they're planning on something, but you don't know what it is. And they were so popular that they eventually not only got the TV series on Nickelodeon, but they would get their own spin-off series, which we'll discuss about later on.
I'll tell you, is there actually some Penguins of Madagascar movies?
Yes, there is. There is a Penguins of Madagascar movie, which
ladies
we will
and gentlemen,
later.
you're about to witness it first, because I've never seen one of them. I mean, there's some of the DreamWorks films that you can tell I'm pretty enthusiastic over here in DreamMachine. I've actually seen, like, once, twice, 3 times, or something like that. I've never ever seen a Penguins of Madagascar movie ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can. It's funny that we look back on the penguins' popularity. I guess this is what, for a lot of kids, this is what the Minions are like to them now.
Yeah, like, don't you notice that? I mean, would you say the penguins phenomenon kind of kicked off the whole Minion thing? Do you think, like,
Well,
would it
at
be
least
fair to
they
say that?
talk, and at least they have distinct personalities. The minions just don't do anything except like they garble and then they do crazy things, but they don't have like a focus. It's like
But it
in
just
the
seems to be the theme that we seems to be going on is like so you have like the minions are like illumination entertainment. At McDonald's you have those like Happy Meal boxes now that are running around and stuff like that. And then in Nintendo have got the Inklings from Splatoon. I mean, like, and those types of characters. There seems to be kind of like these small, wide-eyed characters that don't have like their own language and aren't really like audibly able, like they're just blabbering pretty
Yeah,
much.
that's
And,
true.
yeah, it's just
I guess you could say that, that the Penguins kind of started it, but the Minions pretty much just took it over, and a whole bunch of movies have been ripping them off ever since, which is ugh.
By the way, also, so all you Splatoon fans out there, I'm a massive fan of Splatoon, by the way, so, don't get cooked, stay off the hook. But, I mean, so going back in regards to, in regards to the Penguins, yeah, they became their own kind of thing, but, given that Madagascar is another one of those middle of the road films, and by the way, actually, I mean, I'm probably going to spoil this all now, but I'm actually, I actually don't mind Madagascar, I actually do like it. I
Yeah,
think.
me too.
Yeah.
I do like it as well. It's not as horrible as I've heard so many people say. Like, they understand how Shrek became a huge franchise, but not Madagascar. But it left it on a cliffhanger note that they never got back to the island, and you're wondering what's going to happen next. It's not like, oh, it just became like a massive failure and nobody cares about it. There's a lot of things about it that I do like.
I went on the assumption that they finally found some gas for the boat and they eventually just went back. But that was before, obviously, we got the other sequels. To Madagascar, which we're going to go into at some point. But basically it's I mean. The one thing I don't really like about it is that this is supposed to be a 4-team movie. Like, you got Alex, you got Marty, you got Melman, you got Gloria. But in reality, like, really, this should have probably just been a buddy film. Like, this should have been just Alex and Marty. Really.
Yeah, that's true, because they're the ones that you remember the most. I think that if Melman and Gloria were a little bit more interesting, then I don't mind them being there because, the maximum I feel about how many characters should be in a group is about 5. But yeah, I feel like Marty and Alex, kind of like a buddy cop movie in a sense in which you have these two characters who have different personalities and, they end up pretty much in the middle of Madagascar. It's like, maybe Marty's going through one thing and Alex is going through another. So I think that maybe squeezing it up to 2 would have been good. I guess maybe they didn't want to go the Shrek and Donkey perspective in which you have Shrek and Donkey as like 2. So maybe they, having a group is like, it kind of differs from Shrek because at the time Shrek was still very, very popular.
Yeah, I just think there's one thing that's for me is I feel is a bit sinful for me because if I had to put Chris Rock in any buddy film, obviously it'd be with Jackie Chan and Rush Hour. So like, but for me, like I don't know, seeing Chris Rock with Ben Stiller and me liking it is kind of like it feels a bit awkward for me. Just
Sure.
Right. Like feels like an extramarital affair for me. But yeah, I definitely say that. While I do like Ben Stiller and Chris Rock, I think they do have some chemistry in this film. There's nowhere near as good as like seeing Chris Rock and Jackie Chan together in Rush Hour. I think it's like they're not opposites enough. I think I think the fact that obviously you have Marty as a zebra and you have Alex as a lion. Obviously, how far opposite can you go in that regard? But as comedians, I don't think they kind of like put that boundary between each other that much. I don't think.
Not really, but at least they don't feel samey like the characters from El Dorado, in which even though that they have distinct style differences, I really couldn't tell from either of them based on their personalities. So at least I can tell a little bit here.
Mm-hmm. So just speaking almost on this, so obviously you have the situation in of them obviously running away from the from the park, and then also he goes into Grand Central Station, and then obviously they get mistaken for wild animals, and then they get obviously shipped off to randomly off to Madagascar, which. Yeah, it kind of comes out. Wouldn't you think that, the fact that a zoo is so nearby that you wouldn't think that their first instinct would be like, maybe they're actually from the zoo.
Yeah, it's actually funny that you mentioned that because I saw a video on Twitter recently about some guy who found a goat while he was walking around in a parking lot to get into his car. He's like, "Wow, there's a goat here. Oh my God, there's a llama. Where did this llama come from?" And it turns out that there was he was near a petting zoo, and some guy who worked at the petting zoo accidentally left the gate open. And so eventually the animals got back. But yeah, I mean, if a goat and a llama can kind of like scare off a guy, it's like, where did these where do these animals come from? Then a giraffe, a lion, a zebra, and a hippo. Yeah, I would think that maybe, hey, I think they're from the zoo. Maybe we should bring them back. This is not Jumanji in which they're like random animals coming out of nowhere and then they're causing a whole bunch of ruckus.
Hmm. So then they end up in Madagascar, and then they meet up with King Julien, who is
Yeah,
Sacha
King
Baron
Julien,
Cohen,
yes.
and
I think this is when Sacha Baron Cohen's career was like starting to slowly pick up because he was very well known for his multi characters. I think this was when he was Ali G, and then eventually like a year later he would be known for Borat.
yeah. So I think because at the time he just did Ali G in the House, which was a panda, unfortunately, and because this is the thing. So I was quite surprised when he landed the role of King Julien, to be honest with you, because Ali G in the House was not as good as Borat. By
Yeah.
a long shot, and unfortunately, Bruno didn't fare any better either. But so it was.
Yeah. I felt like Bruno was kind of like trying to ride on the coattails of Borat. It was just as shocking, but it wasn't anywhere near as fresh as Borat. I remember when Borat came out and when I was in college, everybody was just talking about it and making a whole bunch of references. And even Yu-Gi-Oh! The Abridged series made Shoddy into Borat, which is kind of a dated reference now that I don't think younger viewers even get. But and also, I even saw his TV series, the one that he released recently, where he was interviewing a whole bunch of the of politicians, and it's pretty disturbing. Probably one of my favorite ones is when they're making like a PSA, kids commercial about guns. It
Oh,
was so
and they just read it out
disturbing.
word for word, and you have one Republican who says that, oh, I'm not just going to read this out. So no Republican would do that, and then you just have this kind of like conveyor belt of like all these people who are talking about giving kids guns and training them with guns, like from the age of 3, I think it was, or something like that. It was,
Yes.
oh my god.
And of course, the one that we discussed about in the Aaron Meta show was when they were building the mosque and everybody was getting pissed off.
Yeah, oh my goodness. And on top of that as well, the councilwoman there apparently was really angry at that that shot. So it was
Oh
well,
man, that was so great. It's
yeah.
just the show got canceled 7 episodes in because everybody was just so pissed off. And sadly, we will never see the Sarah Palin interview.
No, so going back to Sharabastian of Gohan as King Julien, so he, for whom he calls these, he discovers these animals and he calls them the New York Giants, and I guess we're kind of, dare I say, going into a Bugs Life territory here, where here comes a bunch of characters who they think they're like, I don't know if they're like, dare I say, even probably some mixture of Road to El Dorado in there, because don't they think they're like gods and they can like protect them
Yeah,
from like
it
the
does
lemurs or something like that? It's like.
that way.
Yeah, so it kind of like goes into it kind of mixes into like two not very good Pixar and DreamWorks films, unfortunately, and so it was why I think that's where I think unfortunately it comes. You can see it from the second act. You can see where the film starts to go downhill at this point. Like you had a somewhat good start. Like I think the approach to it could have been better, but I think. Once we start getting actually into Madagascar and we start to see them out of their element, and then also the out of their element bit is okay. And on top of that, the dream that Alex has, where you can just see meat everywhere, like you can start to see the story arcs start to play out in that. But once we get to King Julien, and once we get to like this tribe, it just doesn't mix well with me. I think at that point, and so that's unfortunate, really. But the fun of the situation still keeps going. Like they obviously get to the bit where Alex does his show, but then you start to see how crazy he's starting to get, and his mane starts to dysfunction, and you can see that he now thinks that everyone is meat, and then all of a sudden he just starts to bite. He just out of nowhere bites Alex. Well, I guess you can't say out of nowhere, but I guess for the characters in the movie, I guess you can say it was out of nowhere. And then he chases after Marty, and then realizes that he needs to lock himself away from the world because he knows he's going to be dangerous.
Yeah, which I actually thought was pretty interesting. Like how would a wild animal act like if he was, I mean, well, not a wild animal, I'm sorry. How would an animal who was raised in a zoo all his life act like if he was in the wild? And, him kicking into his instincts, I think it was a very interesting idea because you're right. It could have gone into like the whole Bug's Life thing in which, they think that these animals are like above them. They come from unknown worlds and such. So I think that the focus of, Alex like going into his instincts it's actually pretty interesting, but sadly that's not like it doesn't really like focus on that as much.
Yeah.
A lot of the focus is leaning towards the other characters and then eventually, leaning over towards like the lemurs and which is fine, but I think that if DreamWorks really wanted to kind of like break away from the comedic stuff, like they kind of like pin themselves into a corner with the popularity of Shrek, and they wanted to tell something more serious, like they did with the Prince of Egypt. Then yeah, I could have seen that, but they did really rely a lot more on the slapstick comedy, which, to be fair, is actually pretty well done.
Yeah. So then we get to the point where the was it the Fusa tribe are about to attack King Julien and all his followers and everything like that, and then Alex has this I don't know where it comes from, but he just has this kind of like turning point where he thinks that he has them fooled, that he still thinks they're prey, but why would the Fusa care about that? That I don't know. Like the ending again, going up to the climax he's just kind of like really patchy of how it all kind of like makes sense, and so. But anyway, we get Alex thinking we think Alex has still got his predatory instincts, but then all of a sudden turns on the Fusa and starts chasing them around, I guess, and that was and then we get to this celebratory feast, which Alex then discovers that he actually likes sushi more than he actually likes steak, which is
like how do lemurs make sushi?
Plot convenience.
do lemurs even eat fish?
I don't know. The thing, I wish I'd mind you. Would animals go wild in Central? Decide for themselves to escape the zoo, and maybe they would. I don't know, but yeah, it's at that point your disbelief is kind of like so put to one side. But it's put us on one side is kind of like in the wrong way of like, okay, I'll just accept this.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Also, they're from Africa and sushi's from Japan. Like, how did they learn it?
I have no idea. So
it's
again, this movie requires quite a lot of explanation. Like, why did Marty want to go into the wild? What's Alex's backstory? Why is he only now seeing things? And maybe we'll say, oh, it's just instinct. But I mean, was there a time where he probably was in the wild? Maybe, and maybe it was a very young age, and he was captured, and he doesn't know.
We'll actually learn a little bit more about Alex's backstory in the second movie.
Well, okay, I've never seen any other Madagascar film than this one at the moment, so if we are going to learn a bit more about that in the second movie, then hey, great.
Yeah, we will. So don't you worry. Stay tuned.
But this is the thing, I guess the problem is like when you have another movie that kind of builds off the second one, but it kind of like it makes me feel like that second movie needs to give more explanations to the first one. It just makes me feel like it makes Madagascar that weaker of a film.
I guess, I mean, unlike Shrek, in which you can kind of see, it on its own, and then if you follow the sequels, you'll see kind of like a progressive storyline. Madagascar, you really need to see it as like a continuing storyline.
Yeah, but it's like, the great thing about Shrek is that it expanded upon the world, and so it did. In Shrek, when the fairy tale creatures moved on somewhere else, like I knew right off my bat, it's like, oh, where did they go? Well, they also just moved on somewhere else. Like, there's not necessarily that's a, I'm sure the world's a. I was under the impression that the Shrek world was a big place, so they could go somewhere else, and that Lord Farquaad didn't control like every single patch of land. So I mean, I was under the impression they probably just moved on to another place, and but Shrek 2, when they said, "Oh, there's a land far, far away," like it expanded the Shrek. You don't need Shrek 2 basically to explain Shrek.
No, you don't.
It's a nice compliment to kind of like broaden the Shrek world, but you don't. A Shrek on its own doesn't require any further explanation.
No, it doesn't.
Unfortunately,
And
from
the
what you're
thing is
telling
that,
me, it sounds like Madagascar 2 you need Madagascar 2 to explain Madagascar, pretty much. So
yeah, you do. In order for you to, get the full Madagascar experience, you do need to watch all the movies back to back. And yeah, that's a kind of like a slight detriment, compared to Shrek, in which is standalone. In which, when you see the ending of the first movie, you're like, oh, Shrek and Fiona, they lived happily ever after, and that's all you needed. Shrek 2 is like a nice compliment, just like you said. But here in Madagascar, you really want to know what happens next.
Okay, well,
that could either be a great thing, maybe like, oh, I'm interested in seeing what happens next. But if you were not, like remotely interested in it, if you thought it was just okay, then it's like homework for some people.
Yeah, it is. So at the box office, the film grossed $47 million with average of around about 4,000 cinemas. So it did make number one in the United States at the beginning, and the film gained about $193 million domestically and foreign gross, obviously for 300. So what was the total? Sorry, get to the totals for $532 million. Pretty much.
Yeah, so it was a huge hit.
It was a huge hit, so we have to give it that. But whether it was a well-received hit or not, I think we probably would have to walk on that one. But at least we can say it made about nearly 5 times more than its $75 million budget. So we can't say it's not bad. We can't say it didn't, fail in that particular regard. But in regards to like a substance of a movie, I mean, there are some elements that I do like about it, but the storytelling is a problem, I think, and I think they needed. And now, obviously, we're gonna have to have Madagascar 2 kind of like right to some of this story's rescue. I think so. Yeah, it's doing. What's the subtitle of Madagascar 2? Madagascar 2.
It's called Madagascar Escape to Africa.
Yeah, should be called Rise to the Cavalry, but whatever. Okay, so that's Madagascar 2, and coming up, I believe, is going to be one of my favorite films.
Yes, it is. So coming up next, we will be discussing about Wallace and Gromit: Curse of the Were-Rabbits.
Yay! I have a lot to say about this, so definitely stay tuned for that one. So from me, Aaron.
And Patricia.
Take care, and bye for now.
See you later.